Good evening. Welcome to another Mothman-podcast. This podcast is where we discuss all things paranormal. I'm your host, Daryl, and with me is...
I'm your co-host, Ann. You can listen to our podcast on Spreaker, Spotify, Apple Podcast, iHeartRadio, Google Podcast, Castbox, SoundCloud, and Deezer. Now let's dive into today's episode.
Before that, let's really tell the people what we're going to be looking at in the future. This podcast is for people who are curious about the paranormal. In the podcast, we will discuss aliens,
UFOs, cryptids, ghosts, spirits, Ouija boards, and all things paranormal. Make sure to subscribe on your favorite podcast player to be notified when new episodes are launched.
And now, into the episode. Okay, tonight, Ann, we're going to continue our discussions into our studies of extra-dimensionals. And I just want to remind everybody that an extra-dimensional is a non-terrestrial being or intelligent life form who are visiting our dimensions of time and space, being with outside our plane of physical time and space. Okay, that's a definition in the dictionary. What I see it as, think about the Earth, draw a circle around the Earth, and then draw a circle around our whole universe. Now, if you look at these circles, you're going to find that the circle around Earth is internal dimensions. That's dimensions that's kind of floating right beside us here on this planet. And they're the ones that I think that visit us. And we also have visitors from extra dimensionals, which would be, and you think about that circle around our universe, and you think about how many trillions of other universes that are out there in an endless space. I guess that's one of the hardest things I have to picture is no start and no beginning. There's too much on Earth where we can see the start of the desk and the end of the desk, the start of the day, the end of the day. We can't even comprehend there's no starting place and there's no ending place. So that's where the extraterrestrials come from. They come from a dimension that is outside of our solar system. And we'll get into that more as we do our studies, because in some of our research, it talks about the supreme being, and we'll get into that. And that's where the religious part comes back into it and get to play. And actually, after I've done a lot of these studies about the interdimensionals and extra-dimensionals, and the studies about the super being, it makes the whole thing of our God more real to me. And I'm not trying to step on anybody's religion. Don't get me wrong. I just want to explain my insight into religion. And we'll do that on other episodes. But tonight we're going to talk about the extra-dimensionals. And there's a guy that has actually been doing a lot of studies. And his name is Jacques Vallée. I've got a little insert here I want to put into the podcast, and I want you to listen to it, and we'll discuss some of his findings and things as we go forward tonight, and then we'll also talk about some other topics. But tonight's going to be fun.
Okay, can I just elaborate on what you said? I looked up some videos on YouTube just to get an understanding of what the different dimensions are.
Right.
And from what I got from it was that it's just on top of ours, just, air, just a sheet away from being the same.
That's the reason I'm saying I draw a circle around the Earth.
Yeah.
And that to me, I have to picture things, and that's the way I can picture it. Yeah. You might be more, can see it different than I do. But I think we're talking about the same thing.
Yeah.
It's just there's layers that are put down there.
Exactly, layers.
And there's different layers. And also some of the books that I've read talks about vibrations. So I think there's some sound that's involved in this interdimensional and extra-dimensional beings, and they can travel. And I've got to put that along with the quantum theory, and there's a lot of technical stuff out there. And I'm not a scientist.
I'm not either.
I'm just a criminal investigator looking for facts. Yeah. So it's hard for me to comprehend all this stuff. But I think that that we're starting to see, at least you and I doing the research, I think we're starting to see a whole new ball game out there when it comes to flying saucers and Bigfoot and different items like that. So go ahead. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interject into your thoughts, but I agree with you about the different sheets and different layers.
Yeah. They said that there are 11 dimensions. We're in the third dimension. The fourth dimension is where time starts to come into question. You can time travel.
Right.
And then the fifth dimension, I think you could go backwards and forwards in time, and it just keeps on going up like that. At some point, the narrator was saying that you could meet yourself in a different dimension because of the dimension you're at. And then the 10th dimension was supposed to be the dimension that God lives in.
Right.
And then the 11th, I can't remember what it was. I'm not sure. It was very hard to wrap my head around. I would have to study it more.
Well, that sounds good. And that sounds like a podcast in itself, that we start sitting down and breaking down each dimension and talk about them separately and how they play into the big picture. Because this big picture that I'm seeing right now is completely different than if you'd asked me a year ago, I would have never, ever thought about this. But this Jacques Vallée, he has been studying this ever since the 1950s. Okay, his science goes back there, and he's gotten books, hundreds of books out there, and he is the world's most authoritative, I guess what I would say, authoritative person, and has the most evidence compiled on actual interdimensional travel. He even brought to the forethought that there's people that's thought about this ever since back in the 1940s, and they've hidden it from us. And you know who's the biggest hider of all this stuff?
I would say the government.
You're right. The government has been hiding all this stuff. And now they're bringing out all these sightings and things like that. And I think they're just trying to warm us up to what they've known for hundreds of years, that there's something out there, but it's not space travel.
Exactly. And my question is, what are they trying to divert our attention from if they're giving us this information? Have you ever seen the movie Wag the Dog?
No.
It's a politician that is having an affair, and he's trying to take the world's eyes off of his affair. So I can't even remember, he made some mess happen to take the eyes off of his affair. It's
that
pretty
sounds
old
like
movie.
some people I know recently.
Yeah, but that's what I call it when something's going on that they're trying to divert our attention from.
Right.
They're wagging the dog.
Okay.
Yeah.
I can see that. Yeah, I can see that very clearly now, especially the way the world is right now. But I want to play a little interview with Jacques. He was interviewed by a guy by the name of Jeffrey Wishlove. Okay. And listen to this.
I think one of the interesting things to mention about you is the fact that you were the person that Steven Spielberg modeled a character of a UFO researcher on in his classic movie Close Encounters of the Third Kind.
I think he was intrigued with the idea of a French scientist running around the United States investigating the UFO phenomena.
You've been looking at this phenomenon for a long time. You've worked closely with Dr. Alan Hynek and other UFO researchers. You've written many authoritative books, and yet your perspective on the UFO issue seems rather unique in the sense that you don't seem to be jumping on the extraterrestrial visitors bandwagon.
That's what was a main point of disagreement with Steven Spielberg. When I met Steven Spielberg, he was about halfway through filming Close Encounters, and we had a long discussion about what UFOs could be. And of course, for him, the main point of the movie was entertainment, and it was appropriate for the UFOs to be extraterrestrial visitors. I think that from my own point of view, I'm going to be very disappointed if UFOs turn out to be nothing more than visitors from another planet, because I think they could be something much more interesting.
Something from another dimension, a space or time?
I think what the UFO phenomenon is teaching us is that we don't understand time and space. Here are objects, I think we have to call them objects, that are physical, that interact with the environment, that cause effects on the witnesses, on the psychology and the physiology of the witnesses, and leave traces on the ground, and yet are capable of, appear to be capable of manipulating time and space in ways that go beyond what our physics understands today.
In your books, particularly your most recent book, Messengers of Deception, which is many years old, you suggest that UFOs are deliberately trying to manipulate our subconscious mind, to create a mythology in our culture about themselves, which is one of the reasons that they're both physical and concrete, yet very elusive at the same time. Do you still feel that way?
I think to answer that, I'm not trying to evade your question, but to answer that, you have to step back a little bit farther. What we know today about the UFO phenomenon is considerably more than we knew 20 years ago or 10 years ago. And we have to understand it at three different levels. The first level is the physical level. And all we can say about UFOs at the physical level is that it's a lot of energy in a small space. In the space of this, if we could take the energy of a nuclear reactor and contain it within this studio, for example, you'd have something that would approximate what a UFO does. It's a lot of energy in a small space emitted through light energy and through pulsed microwave energy. The second level is what happens to witnesses, what would happen to you and me if we were close to that source of energy. And again, now we're beginning to understand the physiological and the psychological correlations of a close encounter.
Yes.
And those have to do with a loss of the sense of space, loss of orientation. I've had witnesses tell me we were driving north when everybody knows they were driving south. They were disoriented at the time. Loss of a sense of time, people thinking that only 10 minutes went by and 3 hours went by. Very often effects on the skin, sunburns, I think that was shown in close encounters. Yes. Effects on the eyes, going from conjunctivitis to blindness, to temporary blindness in some cases.
And sometimes you've mentioned people have actually been healed of diseases.
There have been cases where after a UFO close encounter, it seems that the healing process had been sped up. Now there are known techniques now using electromagnetic radiation that will heal the fractures, for example, or will heal superficial wounds on the skin, but nothing that would heal as fast as the reported effects. So we're beginning to understand at least the descriptions, the symptoms of the exposure to whatever UFO is. And then there is a third level, which is where the level I was addressing in Messengers of Deception, which is a social level.
The impact on our culture.
Yes, and the impact on our belief systems. And at that level, and that's something that's very difficult to convey to the believers in UFOs, the believers in little green men from space, that at that level it really doesn't matter whether UFOs are real or not. If enough people believe that something is real, then it is real in its effects.
In terms of social reality.
In terms of the social reality, in terms of what people act according to their beliefs. Yeah. And that opens a question of, really at two levels, could the UFO phenomenon be manipulating us? Could it be a teaching system of some sort? Perhaps something that we are creating ourselves. Perhaps a series of images that we are projecting. I think Carl Jung came very close to expressing that idea in one of his books. Or could it be manipulated purposely by people who have the technology to simulate UFO sightings? And people say, well, of course not. Who would do a thing like that? Well, I would remind you that during Watergate, during the Watergate investigation, it was discovered that there was a plan originated in the White House to surface a submarine off the coast of Cuba and paint the second coming of Christ over the island of Cuba using holograms, which is well within our technology today. The idea was that since there is a large Catholic population in Cuba, they would be so upset by this vision that this would saturate the communication channels, the telephone system in Cuba, long enough for an invasion to take place.
How interesting. I never heard of that.
Well, I think that's a classic in psychological warfare, but that kind of manipulation is well understood. And I have personally investigated several apparently genuine UFO cases where there was, in fact, a manipulation. My conclusion, the conclusion of scientists working with me, was that there was, in fact, a manipulation taking place, and that it was not a hoax on the part of the witnesses, but a hoax on the part of somebody much better organized than.
So there are possibly all of these levels going on simultaneously.
Today, with the current technology, that would be possible. One of my interests, as you know, has been to look at ancient sightings, old sightings before World War II, for example, when there is really no confusion with modern technology. And if people described, say, in 1925 or in 1825, a disk flying through the air, then it can only have been very, very few phenomena could have produced it.
And there have been some well-documented sightings going back to the 19th century, for example.
There was, starting in 1896, and going into the spring of 1897, there was a remarkable wave of sightings of airships. Those were described as oval objects flying through the sky with lights on them. Of course, the people in those days could only compare it to dirigibles, only compare them to airships. And those objects were capable of doing all the things that UFOs do today, including taking off very quickly and making 90-degree turns, and landing, and occupants coming out of them. And if nothing else, I think this is part of our folklore. This is something that we should be studying as part of our folklore.
I think one of the interesting.
Is the mic back on now? Okay, sorry. Had some equipment malfunction right there, which is normal when we do these things. I don't understand it. We have phone lines going dead. We have computers acting up, but
The aliens.
it's the aliens.
It's aliens.
Now turn your mic back on so you can hear and speak.
Oh, could you not hear me before?
Yeah, I heard aliens, but I don't think
It's aliens.
the podcast listeners heard it. But yeah, I mean, just little articles like that just kind of open your mind, when he's talking about that submarine displaying a hologram over the whole country and stuff like that off the coast. And there's so many ways that we can manipulate what we see and hear that if there is somebody out there, they know our weaknesses, and so they could manipulate too.
You have a stink bug on your shoulder.
Oh, great. Thank you.
He's crawling on your hood.
Is he gone now?
I don't see him anymore. Sorry
Okay.
to interrupt the podcast for that.
Hey. I was going to say, I feel something coming up the back of my head,
It was an alien.
Aliens,
It was
aliens.
Alien stink bug.
We talk about this, but there's the mystery that has gone on for so long, and in our imaginations of our human being imaginations, I guess is what I'm trying to say. For so many years, the mystery of unidentified flying objects and their occupants. He even stated it goes back to the 1800s, but now it's coming to the front pages of our newspapers with a parade of new claims and new evidence. And, not only are these objects seen in the sky and on the ground, but they are said to have contacted humans. and in some cases abducted these humans. And one of the most, I guess, recorded and have the most evidence and the most real evidence that we've had, I hear, it took place back in 1975, in November the 5th, 1975, when an individual named Travis Walton, who was then 22 years old, was working in a forest as a I guess they were cutting down trees in a forestry atmosphere in a national park. And him and his crew had gotten through, and it was about dusk, and they got in the truck and they were heading home. And on the way down the road going home, they noticed a kind of an orange glow off in the distance. And when they got closer, even before the truck stopped, Travis jumps out of the truck and goes running over, thinking that, he's hollering. He says, "I want to see it before it gets away." Well, he gets under it. And as he gets under it, he tells later that he felt the vibrations and heard noises like a generator starting up, like you would if an aircraft was getting ready to take off. And Travis just disappeared. Well, his friends got really spooked. I mean, really spooked.
I bet.
And then they went to home and they started telling the stories and got the law enforcement involved. And then they were questioned and polygraphed, and everybody passed a polygraph. And they were actually looking at them for actually murdering Travis and burying him somewhere out in the woods.
Oh, wow. So
it was really a serious, situation. And then about 5 days later, and I'm kind of paraphrasing all this stuff. About 5 years later, he shows up, and he's on the phone calling some people and saying, "I'm here, and can somebody come and get me?" So they went and got him from the phone booth, and his story has been kind of one of the wildest stories that's ever been out there. But everything he said has been backed up by other individuals who said that they have been abducted. But the only problem is when the scientists started looking into Travis's story, most people that are abducted are tied down to tables and they're poked, and they can hear people and they communicate with telepathy. And so he didn't have any of this. And so the scientists have now concluded, and their conclusion is that was not an abduction. They think what happens, that these intra or extra. I don't know if it was an interdimensional.
It's extra dimensionals, but would be the ones that we consider the aliens.
Okay. Well, the extra dimensionals, here again, I don't know if it was inter or extra, but the whole thing is that they seem to have protocols. And when they're launched into a mission, then they have to abide by those protocols. Apparently, this mission did not account for abducting anybody. It was just, they think now that being under the radiation, as you heard the doctor talk about earlier, the radiation and everything off of the ship underneath it, possibly either killed or almost killed Travis. And they had to take him back with them to try to retrieve it, because their mission would not be to leave a body behind that they caused the death of, because then the scientists can start looking into autopsies and trying to figure out what killed him, and they found out it's radiation, all this kind of stuff. So they can't have that, okay? Gotcha. It's kind of a secret mission. You sneak in and you sneak out, kind of like the Black Ops of Special Forces, in Vietnam. My job was to get in and get out and never know that nobody ever knew I was there.
Yeah.
So they think this is and I can understand that completely, being an ex-military guy, about having a mission and having the MO of what the mission was. And if something falls out of place, you have to try to correct it to the best way you know how, and not leave any evidence of being around.
Yeah.
So they grabbed up his body, and Travis says during his one of his interviews that there was a piece of equipment lying over his chest. but this piece of equipment was not intrusive. It wasn't settled down. He was easily able to move it.
Okay.
And the scientists now think that was maybe something that was monitoring his health and making sure his vital signs were good. Mm-hmm. But during this time when he first woke up, he saw 3 grays moving around the area, which grays has been brought up in many abduction. They talk about grays.
Okay, and we're talking about the aliens, grays.
Right.
Okay.
Or the dimensionals.
The dimensionals, the
Okay.
aliens. Yeah.
So he kind of poked one because one got up close to his face and he kind of poked it, and it felt kind of fatty. And it fell back into another gray, mm-hmm. and there was 3 grays in there, and all 3 of them run out of the room. He gets up and wanders around what he thought was a ship trying to find his way out. He went into one room and started pressing buttons and everything, trying to see if he could open a door or something, and he got some maps that were showing intercelestial maps and things of this sort. And then a Nordic came into one of the rooms. Now, the Nordic...
now, it's a Nordic, correct?
Nordic, yes.
Okay.
I'm sorry. I'm speaking Southern.
You're fine.
Alien right now. Now, Nordic came into the room. When he saw the Nordic standing at the door, he observed what appeared to be a physically fit individual. Good looking is what he said. And he had a glass helmet on around his head, and he was dressed in blue. Well, this Nordic never made any contact with him. He just kind of walked down the hallway, and Travis followed him, and they went into a room. And when they went into a room, there was 2 other Nordics there. And then these 2 Nordics didn't have a glass hood over their helmet or mm-hmm. hood or whatever you want to call it over their head. And he says that's the last thing he remembers until he remembers going to the phone booth. Now, Travis and all of his friends were put through heavy testing, and nobody ever failed. Excuse me, I'll put out false information here. Nobody ever failed a polygraph. And everybody believes that it was the truest story that's ever been told about an encounter with the alien being.
Okay.
Now after he heard some of the stories that the scientists believe now, he thinks that these people probably saved his life. And so he's very thankful to these people. But here again, this whole episode has been so much different than more of the... you find in the abduction tales that everybody kind of... Now, all of them tell about grays, and all of them tell about Nordics, mm-hmm. but nobody ever tells about being able to walk around or not being under strict control at all times. But apparently Travis was not, because I really believe from what I've studied on this and what they've found out, that from listening to his interviews, that he had freedom to move around that craft, whatever it was, and that wasn't part of the plan. So mm-hmm. The whole plan was whatever their mission was, maybe to gather intelligence on plants or whatever, but it was not to abduct a human being. And that's the reason his story is so different than everybody else's. And there's been none before and none after like Travis's. And Travis was actually gone. He thought he was gone for a couple of hours, but he was actually gone for 5 days. And he did have some burns, radiation type burns around different places. And so,
let me ask you this. When we were listening to Jacques Vallée, he was saying that is the increased healing speed where there are injuries from aliens or extra-dimensionals. Yeah. So I wonder how quickly those burns that he had healed.
Well, apparently it took him 5 days to get him up and running, and so he could be released back into the Earth's atmosphere.
Okay, so he was totally healed by the time that they released him.
Yeah, he was. Okay. He felt bad, and but there was no signs of torture or anything like that. So
I would be interested to find out if he lived a natural, long life. or if
we'll go back and research that.
Yeah.
But right now, he's still putting out the stories, so
Okay.
he's still around, and they're
Okay.
still interviewing him. So, but he is. He might have written some books. I don't know. I'll have to check and see.
okay. With
But
that
the
amount
whole
of-
story. But I guess what I'm very interested in this story is the fact that it appears that these entities have an MO or a realm that they have to work within, and it kind of brings me back to
So this is like their protocols.
their protocols, and
Okay.
like Star Trek has their mission to go in places that no man has been, but they can't interfere with what they find and this sort of
Okay.
thing. And I think that's pretty much what we're hearing here now. So that's very, very interesting.
That's very interesting.
So that's what I was looking at. Now,
Let me ask you this. You said that there were Nordics and Greys on board the ship.
right.
So is this two extra dimensional races that are riding together?
No, anybody that's studied this has found that they believe that these entities have the ability to change forms and shapes, just like we change coats. Okay. So that they can relate more, or we can relate more to them and not be so frightening. The Greys are usually when they're doing their operation and they're not really caring if somebody's scared or not. Okay. The Nordics are appearing when they trying to get confidence into us, and they always are well shaped and good looking men and well shaped and good looking women.
Okay, so what I hear you telling me is that the most attractive people are aliens, correct?
Right.
No, I was talking about just in general.
I was too. No, I'm just saying that they have the ability, from what I've been reading and from everybody that's been studying this for years and years. I'm just sticking my toes in the water, and some people have got up to their necks.
Yeah.
So, from what why I go and I guess reinvent the wheel. If these people have done all this research and they found it out, why not? I take some of that and then take that and go do some
Find
research on my
more.
own. Yeah. And what I try to do is read books from different people and get different aspects and see where the lines cross. Okay.
I see.
And so whenever I get the lines crossed, and that's where I find that it's more apt to be factual.
Got you.
So that's what I've been doing on this. And I really believe from what I'm hearing that, this, everybody has their Greys and everybody has their Nordics. So that's one entity. I can't say that it's all over the world. So I can't believe everybody has heard the story from somebody else and trying to make it up the same way. I believe there's too many people over the years that's seen the same thing over and over again all around the world. And that's where some of the lines cross, where it's got to be factual.
Yeah. I would like to know how the reptilians play into the different types of aliens. And can they turn into Nordics?
That's a good question. Apparently, these Nordics can turn into whatever you want to be them
Whatever
to
you
be.
wanna look like?
Yeah,
Okay.
whatever that makes you feel the most comfortable. So if they were dealing with a race of aliens that looked like dinosaurs, they probably look like dinosaurs.
Gotcha.
So that's just the theory that I've come across from some of the lines that I've crossed. Okay.
Gotcha.
So, this is a very interesting topic, and we've been out here for about 33 minutes talking about this, and I just wanted to say that I'm very pleased to announce, due to the technical equipment tonight, we could not interview a person, but hopefully this next podcast, we're going to be able to interview a person that has firsthand knowledge of such an abduction. And you want to tell us a little bit more about that?
Yes, this is a fella that I've known since I was about 16, and he explained to me that he wasn't actually abducted, but there was a ship hovering over his house when he was a child. there was a ship hovering, and he and his mother sat out there and watched it for about 15 minutes. And he said there was a light that came from it onto the house, and he said it was triangle.
Okay. Is there a time loss? Do they remember any time being missing or anything like
His
that?
mother had told me at one time that there was a time loss, but he says he doesn't remember a time loss.
Okay. Is his mother still with us, or has she passed away?
She's not able to come to
Okay.
be interviewed.
All right. Well, we'll talk to this individual and see what he says.
Okay.
Is he aware of his mother's belief that there was a time missing?
Yes.
Okay. Well, we'll talk about that. Okay, everybody. I sure enjoyed tonight's episode. Thank you, Ann, for being here with me.
Oh, sure.
And we hope that you guys enjoyed it as much as we've enjoyed giving it to you. So until next time, this is the Mothman, Daryl.
And this is Ann.
And Ann, you want to tell us again how people can come to see us
Okay.
over the radio?
They can look at mothman-podcast.com, and that will show them every way that they can listen to us is at the bottom of the webpage. They can also contact us at mothman-podcast@gmail.com. We would love for you to send us any of your paranormal stories or give us any feedback, and we will just wait to hear from you.
And I just wanted to add that we have the ability to change voices. We have the ability to keep you anonymous. So don't be afraid to reach out to us. We would love to hear from you. That's the most exciting part of our investigations, is talking to real people about real situations. So until next time, good night.
Good night.